Mahmoud Khalil is still the person who the Trump administration or the what are we specifically the Department of Justice is trying to revoke his visa is still being held, and things are very interesting. Many people are coming in support of him. Many people are coming in the support of Trump's administration to do so. And I think it's a very interesting case that I think needs to be discussed both in the moral aspects and in the legal aspects and sort of the consequences of what this might mean. Welcome to the Daily Objective. Joining me today is James Valliant, and sort of I'll just start with the sort of like the difference between moral and legal. James, maybe you can say, but I think legally this is absolutely sort of pretty much cut and dry case that the Trump administration has the authority and the sort of reasoning to sort of revoke his green card. We can talk about what maybe should be done differently, but in that regard, I think he is pretty much gone. It is important to sort of state that because some people have been saying that Mahmoud Khalil broke a law. Trump's administration is saying they are not even prosecuting him for anything, and they do not need to prosecute him for anything to revoke his green card. Anything more to add on just to start with the sort of legal aspects of this?
No, you did it pretty well. This is long-standing law. It's rare to, deport green card holders. It's absolutely true on this basis. But the law, the immigration law, the existing law that has been upheld in various respects by the Supreme Court, says that merely espousing the cause of terrorism is enough to deport or exclude a person. And so, in other words, the immigration officials can deport someone simply for espousing terrorism. This guy belonged to this Columbia University organization that advocated for, the Palestinian cause explicitly. This organization, by the way, said October 7th was a day that'll go down in history. Sinwar's crowning achievement on October 7th. It praised Sinwar. It praised October 7th. It calls for, I mean, explicitly, the organization calls for, quote, the eradication of Western civilization, end quote. That's part of their, so they do advocate the violent overthrow of all of what, not just Israel and America, which they've specified, but the whole of Western civilization. And they advocate violence. They advocate violence explicitly. They say that we've reached a point where this is no longer a matter of merely having a polite debate. We have every right. They defended the arsonists at Berkeley. And what happened at Columbia was clearly criminal activity. Whether it was prosecuted by the local authorities or not, it's not free speech. These were illegal encampments. They did vandalism. They blocked and harassed Jewish students. They disrupted classes. That's criminal activity, criminal trespass, criminal vandalism, and clearly a conspiracy as well to do so. And this guy advocated, he was their spokesman, he was a member, he's their face, and this organization advocates for violence and was engaged in criminal activity. But they don't need to prove that because his response is, look, I wasn't a part of the encampment. I didn't break the windows. And so therefore I can't be deported. And this is a free speech matter. No, he was aiding and abetting criminal activity that was going on at Columbia. This transcends free speech in any reckoning of it. However, under existing law, whether we morally like it or not, the existing law says that if you espouse or encourage others to espouse terrorist activity, you can have your green card pulled or you could be excluded from the United States. And it is a matter of very basic law. Just in 2018, the Federal Court of Appeals, Circuit Court of Appeals, upheld the exclusion of 2 Iranians simply for handing out flyers. Simply for handing out pro-Iranian flyers. The federal courts have upheld this law, and within the last 7 years, 6 or 7 years, they upheld this law, saying that the immigration authorities could exclude, and it's basically the same standard whether you can exclude or kick out a green card holder simply for handing out flyers. This guy is accused of handing out flyers, but he's also advocating violence. And he's also advocating for a group that was engaged in criminal activities. Even Mr. Khalil's supporters, Yesterday, they occupied the first two floors of Trump Tower in Manhattan on Fifth Avenue. That's a criminal activity. That's not free speech. So they're engaged in criminal activity that's not free speech, claiming that it's a free speech case. And so the moral confusion uh, of Americans, particularly on the American left, is they confuse criminal activity with free speech. You have a right to block traffic. You have a right to, that's part of free speech. Free speech does not include anything that violates other people's rights, full stop. And Khalil's opponents are doing this. The organization that Khalil led, organized, and was a spokesman and negotiator for, engaged in such criminal activity. So we need to distinguish free speech, it seems to me, from these criminal activities, whether or not they were prosecuted by local authorities or not. Now, in terms of our immigration approach, from an objectivist standpoint, I could be a critic of the green card system that America has altogether. I mean, it should perhaps require a criminal conviction, or at least the proof in federal court of criminal activity by a legal standard. Now, existing law does not ignore his free speech rights. Green card holders have free speech rights in general. If he was complaining about tax cuts, or if he was talking about the recent election, or his position on abortion, he has the same free speech rights as American citizens do. It's just that as a green card holder, he cannot espouse, that is to say, advocate for terrorism, which he clearly did. Or on a separate bit of the law, the Secretary of State can say that his mere presence here seriously adversely affects American foreign policy. And here he is, a ringleader for an organization that calls for the destruction of Israel, America, and indeed, quote, the eradication of Western civilization, end quote, and has supported criminal activity such as arson and what went on at Columbia. So it seems to me it is a legal no-brainer. He still has due process rights as well. He gets a hearing in court to make sure that the Secretary of State had a basis for his finding, or that proof that he was in fact espousing terrorism. But as I say, from a moral standpoint, as an objectivist, we might want to wait for. So for me, if we're in declared war as we were against the Nazis, you can, it would seem to me, deport aliens who are advocating Nazism. But in my view, that should probably require a declared war. Or in a case of criminal activity, it should require the government at least to prove that the person engaged in what would be, under state or federal law, a crime, such as vandalism, arson, the breaking the windows, the illegal encampment, threats to the students, disrupting class, things of that nature. This is not free speech, is the main point. And although I am a critic of current immigration law, I think that there are far too few. There are 13 million people in America, by the way, who hold green cards. And I would be frightened. I mean, I don't like the idea that it's only that. Anyone who wants to peacefully come here and work and study should be allowed to do so, so long as they don't engage in criminal activity, so long as they don't advocate for the cause of a military enemy of the United States. Now, maybe America should be at declared war with Hamas and Iran, in which case that would mean, even under my view, advocating for their cause, which he explicitly does. This organization, as I say, praised Sinwar, called October 7th his crowning achievement, and so forth. So these people are advocates of Hamas. And they want the total destruction of Israel. It couldn't be more explicit in their advocacy of Sinwar and Hamas. So, in my view, America should be in a negative stance against this group. And therefore, recent arrivals, at least to America, who advocate their cause should be removable. Even as an objectivist, I'm of that position. And I believe in
Yeah, I
free
think so.
speech.
Yeah, and that's usually sort of my biggest problem when people start advocating for, let's say, someone supporting of Iranian regime or Hamas, and it's like America's not at war with them. And I would agree that these people should be get out, but we need the right process. We cannot, Congress cannot sign one law declaring war on terror and then George Bush can do anything he wants. We need like actual, sort of go back to the processes, which I want to talk a little bit more later, but let's listen to a little bit from Mahmoud Khalil's wife who spoke out. She is not on the video. The woman saying that is just sort of, apparently she didn't want to come out. So let's listen.
I will be reading a statement on behalf of Mahmoud Khalil's wife, who does not wish to be named. My husband was kidnapped from our home, and it's shameful that the United States government continues to hold him because he stood for the rights and lives of his people. I demand his immediate release and return to our family. His disappearance has devastated our lives. Every day without him is filled with uncertainty, not just for me, but for our entire family and community. Our loved ones are struggling with the pain and fear of his sudden absence. And yet, we are not alone. So many who know and love Mahmoud have come together, refusing to stay silent. Their support is a testament to his character and to the deep injustice of what is being done to him. Thank you.
Yeah, someone in the chat points out kidnap and disappearance. He was taken by ICE authorities, as properly you would. This was not like a secret sort of thing. We know where he's being held.
They know exactly where he's being held. He's going to have a public hearing in 2 weeks. It's going to go through the normal due process chains. He was legally arrested under American law. In fact, this woman is advocating illegality in her statement. By equating an arrest by law enforcement officials with kidnapping, she is obviously morally opposed to the legitimacy of American law as such. Now, the man has only been in the country for 2 years, and only in November of last year did he go from student visa status to green card status. I understand his wife is an American citizen and that she's shortly expecting a child. That must be rough on them, and that's really too bad. But her husband advocated violence. Her husband is an anti-Semite bigot. Her husband advocates, quote, the eradication of Western civilization. Her husband thinks Sinwar was a hero. Her husband thinks October 7th was just ducky. His character is rotten. He is a bad man. As I said in our last broadcast on this, he has 2 university degrees. For him to be advocating this evil racist ideology shows that he is a man of sick character. He is defending criminal activity. He was a defender of criminal activity. What was going on in Colombia was criminal activity on any number of grounds, and he was going to negotiate with Colombia on their behalf. In other words, he was aiding and abetting violent activity, anti-Semitic threats against Jews, illegal encampments, vandalism, all manner of criminal activity this man was advocating for and aiding and abetting. His character, to say that he has good character is sick. To say that a man who advocates for October 7th and Hamas is somehow being singled out and targeted for something morally wrong. No, morally the man is despicable. And to defend him on that grounds. And by the way, if your husband is advocating for criminal activity, which he was clearly doing, they want the, quote, eradication of all of Western civilization. They were defending arsonists. They were saying violence is this group advocates violence. They say we've run out of options. The group to which he is a member and was the spokesman of advocates violence in the United States, advocates for criminal activity. Now, it cannot come as a surprise to his wife. These crocodile tears are just that, in my view. We're hearing from another morally despicable human being, defending a morally despicable human being who is advocating criminal activity in the United States and aiding and abetting that criminal activity, as far as I can see. So this shouldn't have come as a surprise to this lady. She knows the monstrous, genocidal, racist ideas that must be polluting her mind as well as this guy's mind. So the spokesman there is utterly despicable as a human being, evading the criminal activities and equating, of course, free speech with violent criminal activities. But this guy's an advocate of violence. Mind you, he's a guy with 2 university degrees who advocates violence and the violent overthrow of the American government, and indeed, quote, the eradication of all of Western civilization. This should hardly be a surprise to her. Aliens, that is to say, even legal aliens, legal residents in this country, who advocate, as I say, you have the same free speech rights, except in certain narrow regards. If you're a recent arrival to the United States, you cannot espouse terrorism. You cannot be, and people say he's being singled out. He's not being singled out. Trump says this is the first of many to come. Besides, what happened last year, and he was perhaps the most visible spokesman for this organization at Columbia, what happened last year, I think, has been accurately described as the most widespread campus violence since the late 1960s. No, as I say, just as late as recently as 2018, the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the exclusion of Iranians simply for handing out leaflets. So this guy's not being singled out. This is black letter law, and Trump has said this is the first of many to come. And it's interesting because he may not have broken the window at Columbia. He may not have been one of the people in the encampment, but he was advocating for them. He was aiding and abetting their criminal activity, advocating their criminal activity, and advocating much worse violence and criminal activity.
Now, one of the other things she said is that he stood up for the rights and lives of his people. No, he didn't. He wants to enslave Palestinians. He wants them to live under a theocracy. He advocates for Hamas. And anybody who argues for the so-called Palestinian state does want the theocracy because there is no other alternative. And we haven't seen any alternative in the Arab world. Well, maybe some secular sort of dictatorship, that socialist dictatorship. That's pretty much the choice you have, and usually you do get both. You get socialism and theocracy in the same way.
Right.
So no, he wasn't advocating for rights. It's Israel is the only country that stands up for rights.
No, he's
The only
advocating.
place Arabs have rights are in Israel, in the Middle East, and in the Western countries in the rest of the world. There is no other place.
Oh,
If
yeah.
you do want rights for those people, you advocate for the Western world. You do not advocate for the eradication of the Western world.
Specifically, this organization advocates for Hamas and for Iran. So obviously he is, the way Hamas ruled Gaza, the way the Iranians rule in Iran, that's what he advocates. He advocates theocratic repression of women. He advocates the execution of gays and blasphemers. He advocates the suppression of political speech. He advocates the oppression of Muslims. And the idea that he's advocating something good for Muslims is insane. He's advocating for Hamas. He's advocating for the Islamic Republic of Iran. There's no other way of putting it. He advocates the oppression of Muslims.
We have a super chat from Bonnie, thank you so much, and a super chat from Christian, thank you so much. Christian says, Susan Sarandon is speaking out in favor of this comeback. Imagine being a Hollywood actor and betraying the civilization who made you rich in the first place. Thoughts on such moral treason? I mean, that's what we usually see in sort of when it comes to, I don't know what do you want to call actors, but that sort
This goes
of
way back. This goes way back. Actors have been advocating for anti-American ideas and indeed for violence for a long time. But I mean, Jane Fonda, the famous Academy Award-winning actress, with her one-time husband, who was a political activist in California, advocated for protests of this kind that were totally illegal and violent. And so, yeah, it is disturbing. Susan Sarandon should have her head looked at because she's one of these people who thinks that criminality and violence are included within free speech. She thinks that what went on October 7th, the people who defend October 7th, or the criminal activity that went on in Columbia that defends it, is free speech. It is not. When you engage in vandalism, illegal encampments, trespass, threats, intimidation, you're violating the law. You're violating other people's rights. Susan Sarandon thinks you have a right to violate fellow American citizens' rights in the name of free speech. Susan Sarandon does not understand the First Amendment. Like many leftist ideologues, Susan Sarandon thinks that criminal behavior that violates individual rights is somehow included in free speech. And anyone who thinks that this is what amounts to a free speech case is saying just that. Free speech includes my right to punch you in the face Daniel, or to threaten you, or to block you, or to destroy your property, or to trespass on your property. No, it does not. It does not. Free speech has nothing to do with rights violating activities that harm the person or property of another person. That is not included in free speech. You can pass out flyers all you want. Now, I understand those flyers are part of his espousing of terrorism, which brings it under this specific law, but this is standard specific law. Trump is not doing anything out of the ordinary from standard American immigration law. And we did experience last year the worst violence on American college campuses, threats against Jews, blocking Jews on campus. Something needs to be done about the most widespread violence on American universities in over 50 years. And Trump means to do something about that. They hate Trump, and that, of course, clouds their view. But more than that, this has been a long-standing view of the left, that somehow free speech includes the right to violate other people's rights, to block bridges, to block roads, to damage property, etc., to threaten Jewish students, etc. No, physical threats of harm, vandalism, criminal trespass, those are crimes, not free speech.
So we can go a bit more into sort of the law aspects, because someone is asking what law is he breaking. So just to remind people, he is not being accused of breaking laws. His visa is being revoked because, or they are trying to revoke his visa because they are alleging his sort of support for terrorism or support of the terrorist organization. That's pretty much.
You don't need a criminal conviction under U.S. law to deport someone. If you're a green card holder, and he's only been a green card holder since November of last year, you can be removed under law for espousing terrorism or encouraging others to espouse terrorism. That's it. That's all they need to show. Now, he gets due process. He'll get a hearing in 2 weeks in Louisiana where he's being legally held under U.S. law, and the government has the burden of proving by clear and convincing evidence that he was espousing terrorism. But that's all they have to do. The American law, whether you like it or not, includes in the federal statute the ability to keep out people who advocate certain un-American ideas. We don't have to bring you into the country, and we can exclude you from the country if you advocate for terrorism or terrorist organization, for example. Now, these Iranians who were excluded in 2018, that the federal court upheld the exclusion of, they were only handing out leaflets. That's all they were doing. This guy is advocating for a terrorist organization, Hamas, that praised October 7th, that praised Sinwar, that calls, as I say, for the, quote, eradication of Western civilization, and advocates violence, has repeatedly stated, this group has repeatedly stated that it's time for violence, for violent criminal activity against the United States to get America to divest in Israel. So he belongs to a group that advocates criminal activity, not just free speech. He advocates for a group that engaged in criminal activity at Columbia University last year. And so under existing law, it's kind of a no-brainer that he's espousing terrorism, or that his presence here poses a serious problem for American foreign policy. But under existing law, that's all that has to happen. I might, as I say, as an objectivist, want the government at least to prove that a crime happened, or to have an official declaration of war before we exclude someone just on the basis of advocating the ideology of the folks we're at war with. As you point out, Daniel, Iran has been at war with the United States for 46 years now. America has not been in an official war with Iran, but we should be at official war with Iran, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas, as far as I'm concerned. But we don't have an official declaration of war. As you point out, all we have is this act of Congress that sort of empowers the president to go after terrorists in general wherever they are. This guy is clearly aiding and abetting criminal activity, was clearly aiding and abetting criminal activity, advocating criminal activity, and criminal activity in support of terrorism, and in particular, Sinwar and Hamas. It's a no-brainer under federal law. As I say, he gets a hearing in court, he gets due process to prove that much, but they don't have to prove that he was convicted of any crime. Or
Yeah,
even crime.
and that way, I do like the challenge that one of the judges did with this. Yeah, even if this would be sort of legal, I do want some sort of like criminal conviction, or I'd like to see, just so we still do, or we do like it should be a clear-cut case. It should be
Right.
basically, because this is not the only guy that we need to go after. There's probably many more that have been doing the same or similar thing
And
that
there are people being expelled from Colombia right now. There are people who are, but the fact that the New York City police arrested dozens of people at Colombia last year, but the prosecutor chose not to. Now there's a problem. The New York prosecutor chose not to go to court on what were clear cases, in my view, easily provable cases of many criminal. I mean, they could have convicted dozens of people of criminal activity, but chose not to. At least the federal court should be able to prove that there was a crime that happened under New York law before they get rid of him. That's my personal view. But under existing law, he gets due process, absolutely. But all they have to show is that he espoused or encouraged others to espouse terrorist activity. And Hamas is an officially designated terrorist organization under American law. So this should be a straightforward case in 2 weeks when he gets his hearing before a judge. And he gets a hearing before a judge to prove that whether or not he was an advocate of terrorism, in other words. And so under American immigration law, recent admittees simply cannot advocate for violence and terrorism and the violent overthrow of the United States, things like that. We don't want people to come in who are advocating violence against civilization and America and its allies, which this guy clearly is. And under existing American law, he can be excluded simply for espousing that.
We have a super chat from Inaka R. She says, "Did it encourage actor Reagan become politician?" Like the scene that was in the sort of the Hollywood, if that encouraged Reagan for becoming politician, I don't know much about why Reagan decided to sort of enter politics. James, do you have anything to say on that?
Well, Reagan became very concerned about the Soviet Union during the Cold War. He started out as a Democrat. I understand that his second wife, Nancy, was also an influence on his political views, but he had been advocating on television certain political views for a long time, even before he entered politics. And he made a rousing speech in 1964 at the Republican convention in support of Goldwater. That put him on the landscape to become two-term governor of California. He had a long political career. But his main motive for getting involved in politics was the Cold War, his concern about the Soviet Union after World War II, changed him from being a Democrat to a Republican. And his wife, I understand, got him to be a consistent, at least more consistent advocate of the free market, at least back in the 1960s.
Bonnie is asking, why isn't the group outlawed? Because we are not at war, but doesn't it advocate violence? So if we are talking, well, his group is the Columbia University Apartheid Divest. There is a separate group that sort of founded this, which is the Students for Justice in Palestine, which is like a 30 to 40-year-old group, so founded like decades ago. Now, some people have been sort of saying that something should be done. And that is sort of my biggest problem that's going on right now, is the fact that nobody is taking them to court to sort of do anything. So
let me make a distinction, an important distinction here. U.S. citizens can advocate violence. Let me just say that right off the bat. You can't make specific criminal threats against someone, and they have to be credible and they have to be imminent in their execution. Free speech is very broad in the United States. Organizations that advocate, say, for the violent overthrow of the United States as such are not illegal and are protected. Most of the members are citizens, and so they wouldn't come under this rule that says you can be deported, and that's all they can do. They can't put him in prison for 10 years for espousing terrorism. They can deport him from the country for espousing terrorism. They can put him in jail for engaging in violence or vandalism or illegal encampments, but the local New York prosecutors didn't pursue those criminal charges. So I'd make a distinction between criminal actions that violate people's rights and advocacy. Unfortunately or fortunately, whatever you think of it, green card holders can be excluded for a certain kind of speech the espousal of terrorism, and Hamas is a officially designated terrorist organization. And like I say, they praised Sinwar, they praised October 7th, they advocate for violence in the United States and the eradication of Western civilization. Now, if that doesn't come within the statute as it's currently written, I don't know what possibly could. So as an advocate of terrorism, and only as a green card holder can he be excluded. Organizations, the Workers' Daily or the communist rag that they're, whatever the current communist rags are that are distributed, very frequently advocate sectarian violence to undermine the capitalist infrastructure or whatever else they have. But that's their complex legal argument or philosophical argument. So long as they themselves are not active participants in violence, they have freedom of speech rights. And citizens of the United States can even advocate terrorism. So this only applies to green card holders, and it only applies to a certain category of speech, namely the espousal of terrorism.
Yeah, and most importantly, America is the land of laws, and if there is something going on with organization, I always say, take them to court. There is, we shouldn't take any shortcuts, especially when it comes to sort of these organizations, if they are truly doing something that is against sort of the law, or maybe if they are doing something you don't like, but it's not against the law. Call your congressman or call your senator.
If you're engaged in civil disobedience, if you think a law is wrong and you on purpose break that law to make a test case, I can see that if it's an unjust law, but that's not what's going on here. For example, the people that are protesting on this guy's Khalil's behalf criminally occupied the first 2 floors of the Trump building yesterday, and the police had to clear them out and make arrests because that was criminal trespass. That's not free speech. These people think that free speech includes the right to violate other people's rights. It does not. Period. Full stop.
And also when it comes to civil disobedience, you are disobeying the specific law, not something else. They are disobeying property rights. They are not disobeying some sort of advocacy.
Law. One, it's not an unjust law that they're disobeying on purpose. And 2, even when you do that, you have to expect you'll get arrested, but then you'll become a martyr for being convicted of an unjust law. Not a just law that prevents vandalism, illegal encampments, criminal trespass, specific threats against people, impeding the roads, impeding bridges. That violates other people's lawful rights. And your freedom of speech and your cause, however justified you think your cause is, doesn't give you the right to violate other people's rights.
Yeah,
that ain't free speech.
And if you think the sort of pro-Palestinian advocacy is being targeted or something, start a stream on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook and go live and see if anybody comes after you. Nobody will, because that is protected. It's not protected to go inside someone else's building and then advocate for Palestine or whatever.
Well, if some Hamas monster came on our channel and said, I have free speech rights, which means I can appear and refute what Daniel and James say on the Daily Objective in the morning, he's wrong. Get your own YouTube channel, dude. And we'll see if you come within YouTube standards about advocating violence, and that's up to YouTube because they're a private. And same with Spotify, same with X, same with any other of these platforms that from which you can get our wonderful podcast, by the way. So yeah, speech is speech, though, and using force against people or their property is criminal, and that's not speech. And this guy advocated it, aided and abetted it, and that's more than sufficient to, under existing law, to get a green card holder removed. And he's a very recent green card holder. All year we had all this campus violence that intimidated Jewish students. Zionists on every college campus practically in America suffered this. And so I don't think he's being singled out at all.
Yeah, so I think we have covered this nicely. As James said, his hearing is supposed to be in 2 weeks, so we might not learn anything new in the meantime, but I think this is definitely an interesting case and also an important case because I think in many cases these people need to be deported, even if they have a wife, they are expecting a kid. The fact is that someone who he knows what he's doing, he knows what he's in danger of, and he should suffer the consequences of that. With that, James, any last thoughts?
No. We are at war in effect. Israel is our ally. Iran and Hamas took American citizens hostage. There's still a living American hostage to be released, as I understand. There's still 22 hostages of our ally Israel, and Americans have come under attack from Hezbollah affiliates and Iran and all the related organizations there. Americans have been attacked. So this is, in my view, it is more than criminal activity. If we had a proper foreign policy, if we properly not only designated Hezbollah and Hamas terrorist organizations, but were at war with Iran, it would be a much more straightforward legal case. You cannot advocate the cause of the enemy and be a recent rival here in the United States. You can get your butt deported under those circumstances. And I think that we should take that kind of a strong moral stance against jihadism in the Middle East, certainly including Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. They are violent enemies of the United States, with which the United States should be in an official state of hostility. And that would make it even more clear in my mind. Recent immigrants cannot advocate for an enemy that America is fighting. And we should be fighting and officially fighting, in my view. So.
And with that, we have no reality show today, but at the top of the hour we have new episode on the Briefly Objective, specifically with Jonathan Honig, talking about international law only protects terrorists. So make sure to check out that. With that, thank you, James, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and bye-bye.
Be safe.